Hello, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today for a discussion on getting your engineers on board with observability. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with Moogsoft. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the observability channel. We may also have some time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those to the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can towards the end. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Amy Toby, and today I'll be joined by our panelists to share their experiences and insights. We're going to go right into introductions. So to start with, I have an order here so that we get everybody. Oh, it went away. So we're going to go by my Zoom order. So starting with Tom. Go ahead and introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll move on.
Hey, Tom Duran. I've been an SRE for a little over 10 years now. Currently running as the director of SRE and platform at Moogsoft, responsible for everything SRE testing and security.
Sherry?
Hi, I'm Sherry, engineering manager at Zalando, part of the SRE department and responsible for observability at Zalando.
Parveen?
Hello, hi, I'm Parveen Khan, and I'm a senior quality analyst at ThoughtWorks, and I'm a tester and a quality advocate working along with the team to build the quality in the product. So this is pretty much me.
And Tiani?
Hi, Tiani Jones. I am a sociotechnologist with The Ready, so I do organizational transformation and change coaching, so everywhere from all throughout the organizational system. So observability is a big factor, as well as and close to where products are actually being developed. And I kind of marry together my background in electrical engineering, computer science with agility and coaching complexity, and then with observability kind of woven into that.
And finally, I'm Amy Toby. I've been an SRE for a little bit longer. It's been called that, about 20 years now, and I'm your moderator today. So with that, we're going to lead off with, I find that if I go out in the world and I ask 4 people what observability is, I'll probably get 6 or 7 answers. So we're going to start by going around to our panelists and asking them what they think observability means and what it means to them. So we're going to start again with Tom.
All right, so I'm going to drop the Zoom and come back, so I'm not first on your list every time.
Oh, okay, so we're going to go to Sherry.
So for me, observability means that you have a right starting point into control of, let's say, from the point of view of the builder, applications, and understand the health of your applications without having to worry about too much. So this is the observability for me in a nutshell, let's say.
All right, Parveen.
Yeah, I think I come from a quality background, like from a testing background, and I think as a tester in me, I think I always try to look for ways to improve quality of the product or application that I'm working on. So I think I like to look at the things of us, like what our system is telling us from mini, micro to macro perspective, like to look for more opportunities to improve and enable the team to do this. So for me, observability tells us many things about how how our systems are working in its own different environments, and I think we kind of can leverage this to improve the quality of the system. And I think it's very simple for me, how observability comes in. The more we know about our application, as thinking from testing point of view, I think the more we can improve the quality and the reliability, right? So this kind of allows shipping faster and kind of shipping and making our users happy. I think this all kind of round up for me. This is what I feel like observability is for me.
Awesome, thank you. And then Tiani?
Yeah, so observability for me is not about an answer or trying to prove something. It's more about understanding and asking questions. So seeing what's happening. So from, observability also obviously, involves your code. It could also mean your workflow. We know a lot about flow metrics. And then also it could be around your work system. Like, how do you learn? How do you reduce design uncertainty? Those are all factors of observability for me. And so I kind of like to think about an observability mindset, which is centering around use of data and to increase the probability of success rather than to prove that a decision is correct. And it allows you to then identify options and then use the data to compare options to see what makes it, what options are likely to provide the best economic performance. So really about questioning, observing, learning, thinking, and observability is kind of what the way into that.
So you're saying we should use data to make business and design decisions?
Definitely.
Wow. Radical. And Tom, are you back?
Yeah, we can circle back to me now. So for me, observability is really like, I come from a time where we built things on bare metal and somebody would SSH into it and start going through S traces and reading direct from the box. So for me, it's get your data out and to everybody. And then, like has been said, it's not an answer, but it's the ability to go spelunking without having to go through 20 different boxes to make sure they're all saying the same thing. So that's observability to me, is just making the data available and getting it out there. What that looks like is going to be different for everyone. None of us run the same stacks. None of us run the same tools. So really, you have to think with that broad idea, and then how do you get it out of there? That's where you start, though, in my opinion.
Yeah, I kind of heard a mix of kind of democratizing access to this data that is currently trapped in our production systems and our other environments, and then that accessibility angle. Bringing the complexity of our systems to more people. I really like that. So with that, we kind of did brush up on using this observability data to make decisions and to move our businesses forward and to make our products better. So are metrics enough to help tell us if we're reaching our goals as an engineering team? It's the next question we have kind of queued up. And so, you were first last time, but you get to go ahead and go again, Tom. So why don't you go ahead and take a stab at that one?
Yeah, so I think metrics are a good start, especially when we're talking about being able to get data on what our workflows are doing, velocities, et cetera, how our application is performing. But I don't necessarily think that metrics are quite enough. So I think when you do things like tracing, those metrics start to actually tell a story from beginning to end. Architecture is constantly changing in a microservice where one dev might do something on the side and somebody does something on the left. And now your architecture is completely different. Well, the trace still shows you what is reality. So I think that's a better story. And then, I don't think anybody's nailed logs quite right, but letting the developers use their own verbiage to say what is happening to their system, I think is also extremely helpful, especially for somebody that comes in, doesn't know the platform. Hey, this log expressly says how I'm broken, where to look, what's going on with the system, et cetera, can really help out in a way metrics really can't.
Cool. And then Sherry?
I think in observability, we want to understand the internal state and the process flow of the software, and consuming the diagnostic outputs that comes out of the application can help us do that. Metrics for me is part of that, and it's not by itself a complete, and when it's used and connected with tracing data, it can become a very powerful tool, but on its own, it can become noisy.
Parveen, you're up.
Yeah, I totally agree what Sherry said here. If metrics are on its own, it tries to create a lot of noise. And I think having the combination of different type of data allows us to get more answers to our questions rather than just metrics alone. I don't think so. Again, it depends on the context of what a team goal is. Like, do they want to just get a noise of like, oh, something is broken, then their goal is achieved. But if they want to answer those questions, then get deep into figuring out where things are going wrong, then I think metrics alone don't give enough context or answer to it. So I think this is what I have experienced and seen.
Awesome. And then Tiani.
Yeah, I think that the practice of figuring out what you want to measure, or the activity of figuring out what you should measure and why, what you're trying to achieve, and having this idea of like evolving metrics. So I think that would have to go along with the practice of measuring. And it also means using a little bit of the team's collective energy and learning what kinds of principles should inform how you're measuring and what you're measuring and where you're trying to go. I think that's probably what I would add to what everyone's already said, which was all, I agreed with everything. It was really good.
Yeah. I really like what everybody said. And I think a thing that was unspoken that I've noticed a bunch is we tend to have to guess which metrics we need ahead of time and lace them into our systems. And one of the things I've noticed is a trend in the last few years is that a lot of these metrics that we laced in that we never ever use are costing a fortune. And so what a lot of organizations are facing right now is how do we reduce the number of metrics that we're collecting that we never look at while retaining the observability of the system. And that's one of these angles in kind of the fancy new distributed tracing world where we start to be able to answer that question a little better, hopefully. So we have another question coming up, which is, and we could take this a couple of ways. What we wrote down was, do we have a story of a time metrics led folks in the wrong direction? I want to open that up a little bit to include logs and maybe even distributed tracing and maybe differentiate between how those have changed the stories as we've progressed from the old days where maybe we had a couple of metrics, about processes that were running on Unix systems or Windows systems. And then we start to have metrics in those processes, and then we start to get better logs out of them. And now we're starting to progress in this world where we have distributed tracing everywhere. And maybe talk about that story of transformation a little bit more than this one time that metrics took us down to a dead end. So with that, Tom, do you have something queued up?
Yeah, so tracing for us is still something we're chasing after. Initially, we were very event driven, so there wasn't a lot of communication between the microservices directly. So tracing wasn't as big of a deal. We could kind of fudge it a little bit, right? So we're delving into that. And I think it, like I said earlier, it is really the evolution of architectures are getting complex enough to the point where they're changing constantly, especially when there's some companies have 30, 50 pushes a day on code. So for me, tracing has really made it a bit, given us the ability to see our architecture. So things like we've worked scope that just sit there on the network and watch where packets are going, are like, hey, here's what your architecture actually looks like. So I think that's the evolution of a developer no longer needing to maintain that or keep it in your head. You can just go visualize it anytime you want.
That's really important. Hey, are you ready, Sherry?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about what you said, all this revolutionary, and I think if you want to put an example out there, there will be a lot of those. And when you said like we produce a lot of metrics and we probably use a little bit of it, I had to smile because it's so true. Out of like 100% data we produce in metrics, we were measuring, we were like maybe 3% was really useful. The rest were just overprotecting themselves by creating much data that otherwise was not needed. And the approach of understanding what telemetry and what amount of telemetry has to be emitted for an application to be observable, for us to be in control, all starts for me from one point of setting service level objective and understanding what is it that we want to promise and what is it that we want to basically from our telemetry require to be able to be confident for our customer point of view. So I think starting from that point on, a lot of questions becomes easier to answer. What is it that we want to do to deliver on our promises to the customers?
I like that because that's one of my favorite parts of SLOs is the way that we use them to tie metrics to the customer experience, as opposed to just being more metrics that we alert on.
Exactly.
Parveen, you're up.
Yeah, I think I was just trying to think of things where we I was working with the new team and we all were new. And in the first week we had these production issues and we were trying to look for, okay, where do we look? And we had a lot of data, but we kind of like, we had to SSH into different VMs to look for logs and metrics for, which were coming from services. I think I remember, like, you know, this, like, we ended up like trying to use, let's forget about it and look into the code and try to debug instead of using that data, because by the time we were getting into different logs,
And
we,
there.
we kind of lost the context. Yeah, we kind of lost the context of what we were trying to look for, like, lost there. So I think that yeah, I got reminded of that story when we were talking about these, like, you know, a story of when the metrics went wrong. And I think that kind of as a team, like, gave us like a thought of like, okay, I think it's very important for us as engineers have access to, it's not about just producing the data, but having access to that data at a centralized place so that it's easy for us asking questions. So I think, yeah, sometimes even though you have the data, still, like, you know, it's not of no use and you go in the wrong direction. So I think, yeah, that's what I got reminded of. Like,
I recently commented on an incident I was investigating that they were looking for a moving needle in an infinite haystack. Because they were trying to find, you know, this error in all of the logs and metrics and everything, and it was just lost in the noise. And that, you reminded me of that as you were talking. And Tiani.
As I've been listening to everyone, the first thing that popped into my mind was like this, like, kind of socio-technical angle was, and it's more of like what I've seen with a lot of the teams I've worked with is kind of a disconnect between their work practices and their work system and their workflow and their how they use their Kanban even, and how they can connect that to what they're seeing happening in production and their ability to deliver to a customer. So tying that thread of like work items and the work system from, okay, how are we structured? Do we work cross-functionally? Do we have work that's like siloed? Do we have excess work in progress? We have a certain amount of throughput. How variable is our throughput? Like, can we even forecast? So I've introduced like Monte Carlo simulations to some teams to help them get into this practice of like reducing down the like standard, like getting those bands of standard deviation of outliers of how they deliver down really tight and kind of stabilize and kind of make that cycle time average flat. And that gives them another study into, wait, like actually these principles around how we work every day, how we team, how we pair up, all that kind of stuff also has a link into quality and our ability to solve problems over, you know, throwing out what we think is a solution versus like a deep study of a problem and then finding a way into it. So that's the one thing I think is really interesting to me, is that making that connection from that more socio work system piece of it to what you actually see in the code too.
I really like that, how you kind of zoomed out and brought us to think about the greater socio-technical system and how observing what's happening in, say, production tells us more than just what production is doing. It's telling us about what our people did leading up to the changes to production.
Yeah, that's upstream from the flow and what's happening there. So yeah, exactly.
It's like a long way of saying Conway's Law.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you do a quick, just short one on what Conway's Law is?
Yeah, so Conway's Law states that the your communication pathways and communication structure in your organization is actually mirrored in your product, in your product architecture. So I can give like a quick example if that helps.
Sure.
I was working with another product person who they had this big team that acquired a small company, and they were having communication issues between those teams. So the small company would join and they would be excluded from meetings, misinformation that they needed to kind of work, and they had to integrate their code into this bigger team existing company that they had joined onto. And then when they looked back into the code, what they found was this these modules, or like what they were connecting in, had information loss. It was like poorly connected, and it mirrored exactly what was happening with the people. And so that's kind of a way to illustrate what Conways talks about.
Awesome, thank you. And our next question, I pulled the audience for some questions. Oh, we have some come in, and we'll get to that in just a second. So definitely put in some more questions because we're coming up to the end of our list. I think we'll be fine on time. But the next one I want to talk about is we had a little discussion before this and we had a little bit more of a mess of a question here. But what I want to dial in on is each of us has touched on the importance of the accessibility of our tools. In terms of not just, I think we think a lot about, when we go to the shiny UI, that's a single point where we go to find the information we want to find. But there's a whole spectrum of places where accessibility applies to observability. Starting from, when we put OpenTelemetry into our code, a lot of people tend to run face first into the boilerplate of setting up OpenTelemetry. And then you have to learn all about spans and traces and things like that. And I'm not trying to denigrate OpenTelemetry because I do a lot of work with it. I'm just saying like this, we need to think about and talk about these barriers. So with that, Tom, can you start talking a little bit about how you think about accessibility of observability in your organization?
Yeah, so I think honestly for me, the accessibility of it is just making sure that anyone can get at it. So it really depends on who you're talking to. So if I'm talking to an engineer or an SRE, hey, if the data's in prom, wherever, you should be able to get it back out and have that level of knowledge. If I'm talking to somebody from the business side, I think more about what questions do you have that we should be answering and what dashboards can I then create that just gives them that data firsthand so they don't have to go spelunking on their own. So it's really dependent on who you're talking to and where it's coming from. And then I think the most interesting times is when somebody has a question and you pour through all of your data and you're like, wow, I could not answer that. So how do we then get that data back? Because it's there. How do we get that out of our systems and in somebody's face? That's always most interesting to me, especially when you have to go spelunking and you've already thought you had your metrics, et cetera. You're like, oh yeah, that's a good question. Give me 2 weeks, thanks.
Yeah. And Sherry, I think Sherry has a little bit to say about this topic.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, in any at scale company, you run very quickly at the one problem, the fragmentation of tooling, which would actually go against what you want to achieve of democratizing observability, let's say in this case. And for that, I think starting from thinking of interoperability between toolings and also making sure that we will take the burden from builders, developers to focus on their business codes and basically get out of the box what they need for the application to be observable and take those burden away, have those things in a process. Let's say the SRE can come in place and really help out with automizing most of these processes and help them just get the things out of the box. Well, for us, for example, we started with a certain set of libraries, SDKs, as I said before in our thing, that basically helps the developers take this burden of having to understand, what do I do with instrumentation? I need to invest so much time to have my application instrumented. I don't know where to start, where to learn how to do this, what is the right way of doing it. All of these things then taken away and they just use one thing and this is emitting the right way of telemetry needed. And this is achieved by standardizing between how we want to emit those. So basically, if department wants to understand the context of various application in, as you said, this haystack, then they understand how to make sense of the data, how to read the data, because all the semantic conventions that are in place, the namings, how we use them, how to produce them, are standardized across the organization.
Is that part of like a larger Golden Path program? Like, you've talked about the observability part, but do you also do that with like, system libraries for accessing internal APIs and CI, CD, and all of kind of the stuff that every service needs? So
yeah, I mean, yeah, because I mean, all of these things are hand in hand, to be honest with you. When you have the right amount of that when you have the right way of observing things and this is standardized, then you can talk about gradual deployment, because what you can do, you can now leverage from tracing and see, okay, let's go ahead with the gradual deployment, watch the tracing data, roll back automatically when needed, and all these things becomes accessible, available for people to leverage from, and then we can move away from cause-based alerting to symptom-based alerting, and all these questions and all these scenarios start to shape out when we go that path down.
It's almost like when we start to normalize things on one end of the system, that the behavior starts to normalize too. It's kind of weird like that. I'll wait for, we're going to get to Tiani in a minute, a bit. Parveen, what do you want to say about this?
Yeah, I think for me, like access, if we are talking about like being accessible, like, I think all I think about is like how whatever data we are trying to, whatever instrumentation we have added, how easy is it for everyone else to access it? Like it shouldn't be something like very like at different places and only like certain roles, like, only developers are like having that ability to access and understand it, but also like anyone from the team should be able to access it and understand what it is talking about, like whatever the information we are seeing, whether it's or and try to understand that information at what is accessible. I can look from accessibility point of view, and I think also like everyone has so much to input into it, like getting those questions from like product owners, like they are very close to the product. I think trying to get, okay, whatever the questions they are asking, if we look into it, are we able to answer those questions? Are we able to feedback into it? I think all these comes around for me if it comes to like how accessible it is in terms of tools and understanding of the data.
Yeah, being able to answer questions for our internal stakeholders is kind of a big deal. They really seem to like that. And Tiani.
That's kind of an interesting segue to what I was thinking about, is that I saw a really cool tweet around data from Troy McGinnis one time and metrics and dashboards. And he mentioned the idea of having strategic dashboards, which are like around maybe OKRs and KPIs, like key performance indicators. They're very long term. And then something around analytic dashboards, which is like processing data to identify trends, like change over time. Like you want to improve something, but you want to learn something is happening before it happens, kind of thing. And then this idea of operational dashboards, very short term, something's on fire now, a build's broken, whatever, that kind of thing. And I think that's an interesting area I've seen, because we see a lot of data at aggregate and sometimes pushed up to like higher parts of the organization. It's not the right audience. So you have to figure out like who's the audience, what kinds of decisions do they need to make day to day? What are these, if a metric's not informing some kind of decision making, then it could be waste. And I think that kind of exercise, bit by bit stepping into building what your observability is a really good way of thinking about it. And it makes it accessible then, because it's fit to purpose and fit to context and fit to the people that need to make decisions with the data.
That fits into like agile and lean kind of approaches to things too, because you can kind of narrowly focus on the questions you want to answer to start with. Yeah. Right. And kind of work out from there, instead of trying to swallow the world and then push that into production and then figure out what questions you need to answer. Yeah. Excellent. We have a question from the audience. The one I wanted to start with was Shilpa Dunway. Asks, what advice do you have to get product owners and stakeholders on board with your observability journey? And let's start with Tom.
Yeah, sorry. Give me just 1 minute if you want to skip to somebody else.
Yeah, let's go to Sherry.
I can get that, no problem. The advice is to create success story. We have one way of doing it, and this is by, first of all, whatever we do, we call it dog fooding, meaning that we start from ourselves and we slowly get some beta testers to use our way of working, and then create some success stories. And it's going to be kind of unavoidable to see how we eliminate pain and how we create kind of control situation for teams so that they can focus on the work that matters. And this is seems to be successful and people seem to like when they see a little bit of attraction on something.
Yeah, building success on success. Let's go to Parveet.
Yeah, I think I had product owners slash project managers where where we wanted to start having some sort of work done on observability. I mean, just trying to add some instrumentation, start with the first steps. But I think we used to get a lot of pushbacks that, okay, we need to deliver the features. That's more important, because that's a pushback which we used to have. But I think at the other side of the thing is they care more about whenever there are a lot of production issues, and if we cannot solve if we cannot fix them or solve them, or at least give answers back to them, that is exactly what they expect, I think, from my point of view, right? So I think selling the idea of okay, we can work on these new features, but I think if we have as a team, if we given some time to invest a bit more on building these kind of things, I think we can I'm not saying that having observability fixes all the issues, but at least at least you'll give some answers to the product owners, because I think we had those instances where we had no answers to give to the product owners, by when we are going to fix something or what is wrong, at least not even when, but what exactly is wrong. So I think we try to sell the idea of okay, we will try to give more information if we get some more information from the system. So for us to give you that answer, I think we need some more time to invest in adding instrumentation, which will take away some more time. So I think it's kind of those kind of, depending on the context, I think that's what kind of we tried, and that kind of worked for us, and slowly getting into the place where trying to show the value by picking up smaller stories and trying to show, okay, this is how we can show the value of investing this time into it. So that's how it worked for us.
I like that focus on the thing that that your stakeholders really want, right? Which is they just want to know what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
And it makes people so happy when you come to them and you show them hey, this is what happened. And it doesn't matter that a bad thing happened. They're just happy that there's an answer.
Exactly. That's exactly.
And off of that, what do you got to say, Tiani?
Two things came to mind. One was I'm often involved in, incepting teams through some kind, with stakeholders and product people and, dev teams, whomever needs to be part of some kickoff activities, a series of them. And I think that it's fine to actually it's a good thing to bring up probing questions as part of your chartering and forming a team and how you're going to work and what's important and what are your trade-offs you want to make, what are non-functional requirements, and that can kind of set you up for that conversation. Hey, observability will be important because quality or X, Y, and Z are super important, or whatever it is that, and so here are things that we want to establish right now, and of course we're going to grow and iterate and deepen that over time. And then if you're not in that incepting moment, you're kind of okay, I think this is a missing thing. I think everyone's made really good points about how to kind of get that buy-in already, but I think what came to mind is that it becomes a type of tech debt, or it can be even organizational debt, and I think people are kind of used to having conversations around that. So it is work, it is part of the work. So what I think, one way that I've illustrated it is that you have all these, you have actions towards a goal, and that's kind of a pragmatic action. And if you want to do more epistemic thinking, how do we get here? Why are we here? And what are our assumptions going into it? You want to have data or information coming back that challenges your assumptions and then makes you tweak your action towards your goal. Observability metrics is one way to do that. And when you do that, then your work is feature work, it's continuous improvement work, and it's also maybe even rework. Everything we do in project teams is a work mix, and that mix changes slightly from time to time. Sometimes you might have to do a continuous improvement and push. You have a little bit more of continuous improvement because you kind of you need to get ahead or get ahead of some things. And then maybe you're doing a push where it's like feature development and it's like kind of new things going out, but you're always looking at a work mix. And we've actually made this like drawing in this team and like talked to other teams about that. Like, and it kind of made, illustrated that point and made that conversation easier because everyone's like, yeah, okay, hadn't thought of it that way. Yes, that's right. Let's start to prioritize some of this as part of our work mix.
If I may add something to Tiani, what you say, I really, really like what you said about measuring observability metrics. And that is one of the success stories that you can actually bring up in a situation of an incident. The teams that they had proper observability in place had more control, and they could mitigate the situation and get to the restore state much faster than those that they had none in place. And these are the kind of metrics that you want to showcase and be more data driven of how to get people on board and why this matters.
Yeah. And I like how we've been having these really nice segues between our panelists. And this one, I feel like we're setting Tom up perfectly because what Tiani said and even what Sherry said really brought me back to thinking about SLOs again, which is this feedback system where we pull some of our observations about behavior in production, customer facing behavior, and use it to tune the back half of the system, the social side. How much feature work are we doing? How much tech debt are we paying off? So Tom, could you maybe take that a little bit further, please?
Yeah. So, I really liked what Tiani said about, when you're starting from inception, you can create your own roadmap. I've primarily been dumped into a team and been like, hey, what's our observability stance? Oh, what does that word mean? Got it. That's where we're starting. Cool. Which is fine. We all start somewhere. So for me, it is like you said about that SLO. We can prove that we can work through and get a mean time to resolve faster the more data that we have. So one of the things that I consistently bring up is, especially in our postmortems, is to just simply say, like, what data did we have? What data was missing? How can we get at that data? And most importantly, how can I make it easy for my developers or for my SREs to continue feeding us this data? Because one thing people don't always consider is we build the platform, it has all kinds of observability. A year later, no observability because we didn't care and feed it. So you have to keep that simple. You have to keep grinding on why it's important, because if you're fortunate not to have an outage for 6 months and then suddenly have one and your observability has a gap, well, now you got to go chase after that. But if you're consistently showing the importance and feeding data and kind of answering questions with it, I don't think you have that kind of spiky feedback loop with observability there.
That's one of the kind of knobs of SLOs that maybe we don't talk about enough, that I feel like our product teams would like us to talk about more, is if we do have that 6 month period of low adaptivity, right? Like where we're not having incidents or having to interact with our production systems that much, it's probably time to push that feature knob a little bit more aggressive, because we're becoming complacent and losing the skills. We're having skill rot and even like bit rot in our observability feed. So I really like how you pointed that out. And next up, we got a couple more questions from the audience. And let's talk for a minute about, trying to read these real quick. Sorry about that. So Mike is asking, to Sherry's point about providing out-of-the-box telemetry, what recommendations would you have for standardizing telemetry when business goals and team KPIs have no standards? Can unpredictable business-driven measurements really be pre-instrumented with out-of-the-box tooling? So I think they're getting at, right, there's a certain amount. I wasn't going to do that because I already just did that.
But this is
I'm going to go straight
right?
to you, Sherry, to kick this off. Do you want to take a swing at filling in the gap?
Of course. So when we talk about standardized telemetry, we're literally talking about the telemetry that we want to emit out of our application out of the box by using technologies out there. For example, the open telemetry does give you that. Yes, it's a moving target, but for example, we get some subset of that and provide something like that, as I said, like the SDKs, to make sure people have some sort of standardized telemetry emitted. But the story starts from there. And what your question comes is after that. So now we have this data emitted. What do we do with that? So we go to back to business. We ask our business owners, what is the promise that you want to give to your customers? And this comes into the format of the SLO. And they say, well, on set, and this SLO is important to mention also that it's not based on an application, it's based on the operations that they want to give to their customers. So one application might have a couple of SLOs that would be set. And once that is set from the business owner, we take that as our input, and the rest is out of the box provided for them, meaning we use those telemetry emitted to measure these certain SLIs, which would then feed into those measurement of the SLOs. From there on, everything is set. As you mentioned very nicely, Amy, they would have, let's say the business owner says, I would like to have 99.5% of the time availability on my operation, which is critical for my customer. That would set for the feature teams, 0.05% is your budget. Go crazy, bring out the features that you want to bring. But if you burn out your budget, this month is over, you must wait. So this is the kind of systematic way of working with these SLOs. And it doesn't matter where you start. You don't have to, it's not like a tooling that you say, now we have it, everyone has to within a week have a SLO. It's a journey. You start from one point. Like I said, we started from our own selves, the SRE department. We set our own SLOs. We said, we want to give you this product. It's internal. Our customers are internal customers. It doesn't matter. But we define the customer scope. We define the promise that we want to give to these customers. And we do this. We use our own product to measure all of that. And then we continue one by one by spreading the word. And people see how they can be successful with it. And they will start adopting the same set of tooling and same set of SRE way of doing things.
There's a really great cliche that you kind of didn't say in there, right? Like the journey is more important than the destination.
Yeah.
Right. It's very much seeing that with my SLO program too, right? Is we're still very early, we're still figuring it out, but a lot of what we're discovering is gaps in feedback systems throughout the organization that we're able to address through this journey. And that's really cool. So with that, I'm going to make Tom go last this time. So Tiani, you're up. And we got about a couple of minutes left. So
yeah, I lost track of what question we're actually on because it was like so much.
we were talking about, you know, what kind of standardization helps us, recommendations for standardizing things. I think you already mentioned like how to do business goals, extract business goals from telemetry. We talked a bit about SLOs already from, you know, our SRE heads over here. So maybe you could talk a little bit about experience you've had with KPIs in particular.
Oh, okay. So I think that I'll kind of go a little bit macro on this one, is that, and back to something I said before, which is around understanding outcomes and having some shared language about how you express that can be useful. The other thing I think is important is from a standardization perspective. I don't think teams need to measure or manage everything the same way when it comes to their workflows. And the reason why I say that is because I've worked with, I don't even know how many teams that you would say were agile teams. And they all had things they did slightly differently for reasons that made perfect sense because of their context and what they were trying to build and their tech stack and all of that.
That's how Agile's supposed to be, right?
And that's how it's supposed to be, which is, I think, what sometimes gets lost is figuring out how to provide a shared language with the group that's solving a problem, not like kind of matching whatever you're doing to something else outside and saying it has to be that because this is the rule. And so, for example, some teams, they may not be used to having conversations around the conversation. I think what's important, like for example, estimation, and people measure velocity or burn downs and burn ups, that kind of thing. I'm kind of maybe like a no estimates person ultimately, but
that's a whole nother panel.
It's another panel. But I do find that the conversations that teams have around what is this thing? How do we do it?
Hmm.
How complicated is it, or does it have to be, is valuable. Sometimes that leads them to estimation activity. So they might start there and you do velocity measurements because they're doing some kind of like planning, poker. I don't know. Other teams may have, depending on what tool set they're using, maybe using flow metrics. So cycle time and lead time and through, variability of throughput and aging work in process and Monte Carlo simulations. I mean, things like that. And they're really like looking at their work system and they're used to it. And so a team that's kind of new to those kind of concepts and doesn't really like exercise those muscles is not going to be able to drop into like flow metrics and do very well. That doesn't have any meaning for them and they haven't experienced it. So
I don't mean to interrupt, but we do have to tie up where we actually just hit time. So
so
I apologize. But what I take that to is what I heard is often these kinds of discussions talk a lot about the technology, the code, the libraries, and how do we get this stuff integrated with all of our tech. And I really love how we consistently pulled out of that world and talk more about how teams experience it, how our organizations experience observability, and how we are changing the world around us with these new techniques, not new, but like new to the people around us. And so with that, I want to thank all of our panelists, Tom, Sherry, Tiani, and Parveen. I hope everything's okay. And there she is, we're just in time. So
I'm so sorry.
thank you, everyone. And I think we're all done.